Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with lemon and jalapeno marinated mussels. That's right, there are few things better than a big, beautiful bowl of steaming mussels, especially when paired with some crispy fries and maybe a nice cold beer. And yet, as amazing as that is, it's still only my second favorite way to eat mussels, which is why I'm so excited to show you this preparation, also known as my favorite way to eat mussels, at least during the hot weather months. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to have to do is find a couple pounds of live black mussels. And before we use them, they should definitely be scrubbed and debearded, and then rinsed and drained, which is generally how they're sold these days. But if not, I'm going to give you some tips on the blog post on how to prep them. And what we're going to do is steam those mussels open using a diced onion, which I'm going to add to this pan with a little bit of olive oil and a nice big pinch of salt. And what we'll do is cook those stirring over medium-high heat till they just start to sizzle. And sure, you could cook these further and get them sort of golden brown where they start to get a little bit sweet. But for this approach, I think we want something a little sharper in flavor. So like I said, I'm just going to cook these until they start sizzling, and they look a little something like this. At which point I'm going to grab my mussels and carefully transfer those into the pan. And by the way, there's probably going to be about a tablespoon or two of water left in the bowl, which is totally fine to add, but we don't want any more than that, so make sure these are fairly well drained. And then all we need to do is cover this tightly and cook it for about 2 minutes or so, or until the mussels just open up. And if that happens all at once, great. But if some open before others, make sure you pull them out, because these things go from plump and perky to puny and pathetic in about 30 seconds. So what I'm trying to say is that as soon as these open, we have to get them off the heat and quickly transfer them into a bowl, along with any and all accumulated juices. And then once we've successfully bowled our bivalves, we're going to let them sit for a few minutes until they're cool enough to handle, at which point we're going to carefully separate the mussel from the shell, which I usually do just using my fingers, but some people do like to use the other half of the shell to sort of scrape it out, which does work. And if you're having trouble getting these out, go ahead and try it. I mean, you guys are after all the Nipsey Russells of your marinated mussels. And speaking of match game, as you do this, be sure to save the shells, because once our mussels are marinated, we're going to transfer those back to the shells, matching big mussels with big shells and small mussels with small shells. Or I guess the other way around if you're a little odd. But anyway, we're going to separate the mussels and reserve the shells. And once that's been accomplished, we will transfer the mussels to the fridge while we work on our dressing. And the base of that's actually going to be our reserved accumulated juices, which we'll transfer back into the pan and put the heat on to medium-high. And what we want to do is reduce this until most of the liquid evaporates, and we basically have sort of a glaze. And by the way, if you ever find yourself on a shellfish-related trivia game show, the juices that come from mussels and clams and oysters is referred to as a liquor. So don't miss that question. Oh, and a little tip here, if you want this to burn, just walk away for a minute. That will definitely do it, because this is going to reduce very fast. So in fact, you don't want to go anywhere. Just watch the pan and watch it reduce until it reaches about this point. And once that happens, we will transfer that into a clean bowl, and we will let that cool down, at which point we will continue on with the rest of the dressing ingredients. And first up, we will add in a little bit of freshly grated lemon zest. All right, not too much. Okay, a little bit of lemon oil goes a long way. And that's exactly what we're activating by grating that zest. And then, of course, as the name would indicate, we're also going to need some jalapeno, which I think for this should be very finely diced. And then for our acidity, we'll squeeze in some fresh lemon juice, as well as a couple splashes of champagne vinegar. And then we'll finish this by using classic vinaigrette technique, which means whisking in enough oil until we're happy with the balance between the oil and our acidic ingredients. And for me, a very general rule of thumb, I usually go about 3 parts oil to 1 part vinegar. But for something like this, it's really more of a sauce. I usually go with something closer to 2 to 1 oil to vinegar ratio. And of course, having said all that, I don't measure. I'll just keep whisking it in and testing it until it tastes right. And by the way, that mussel liquor is going to be naturally a little bit salty. And since we started this dressing with that reduction, we should have enough salt, but you definitely still want to check. And then once that's set, we'll go ahead and pull out our mussels. And we'll go ahead and spoon that dressing over. And yes, I probably could have just poured this all on, but I thought that would have been a little too fast. So I decided to go with the spoon to give me a little more time to enjoy the application. All right, it's these little meditations you get to do when you cook that make it even more enjoyable and relaxing. And then what we'll do once these two components have been combined is go ahead and press some plastic down on the top. And that's it. Once wrapped, we'll transfer that into the fridge for anywhere between 2 and 8 hours. And I personally think anywhere between 2 and 4 hours is the sweet spot. And of course, at some point during that marination time, We will want to finish cleaning and arranging our half shells. And of course, we'll be picking the biggest and the best and the most beautiful. And then once we've decided our mussels have marinated long enough, we'll go ahead and pull those out and give those a gentle but thoughtful mix with a spoon. At which point we'll go ahead and transfer a mussel into each shell. Sort of trying to match the sizes, I guess. But don't pull a mussel. It's not really that big of a deal. Oh, and if you happen to have a couple tiny mussels, you could put 2 of those together and fill 1 shell. But fortunately, since I didn't overcook mine, they were all a nice size. And that's it. Once our shells are filled, we'll go ahead and spoon over as much dressing as we can possibly fit in and over, doing our best to evenly distribute that minced jalapeno. And that's it. We can serve this immediately, or pop it back in the fridge to chill it even more. All right, I think the colder this is served, the better. But I am going to go ahead and grab one now, so I can remind myself why I love marinated mussels so much. All right, I'll get to the taste in a minute. But because a chilled mussel is so much firmer and meatier, I really do enjoy the texture with this approach more than the hot steam ones. And I could have easily eaten that whole plate as is. But if you want, and I did, we could fancy these up a little bit with a slice of Fresno chili. And by the way, you get extra credit for serving these on shaved ice, since like I said, the colder the better. And by the way, in the spirit of full disclosure, that's not actually shaved ice. I just simulated that with some coarse salt, like one of your finer food stylists would have done. And as much as I enjoy the texture of a cold marinated mussel, I think I enjoy the flavor even more. All right, we have a little bit of a subtle sweetness coming through from the onions, which is being perfectly balanced by this bracing cold vinaigrette. And I love all spicy food, but there's something about a chilled spicy dish that just seems so much more interesting. So I really did thoroughly enjoy this. Like I mentioned earlier, there are very, very few things I like better than a big bowl of steaming mussels. And yet this is one of them, especially during the summer. So hot weather permitting, I really do hope you give these a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.